Hey Fuggers, what's up? Today we're going to be looking at some new cards revealed for Hearthstone, but before we get into that, if you want to be a Fugger, subscribe to my channel down below and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all my new content which I release every week. It's absolutely free and painless to subscribe, and you can always unsubscribe later, so please, every single one of your subscriptions counts, and I really appreciate it. Also, make sure you stick around until the end so you can catch my question of the day. Anyway, let's go ahead and review some cards.
What's up, Fuggers?
Alright, before we get started, I just wanted to address, yes, these cards were all revealed a few days ago. I was not able to get a video out, but I'm going to cover them all now, so let's go ahead and look at them together. Now, our first card here is a really interesting one, and it's got a lot going on. It's called Symphony of Sins. It's a 6-mana spell for Warlock that says, discover and play a movement, shuffle the other 6 into your deck. So, you can see the movements up here above me, and there's some really powerful effects in there. You've got Movement of Pride, which says draw your highest cost minion and reduce it by 6. So that's going to go ahead and give you back the 6 mana you spent on this already. You have Movement of Greed, which draws 6 cards. Now that's typically, for 6 mana, that's going to be too many cards, because you can't really dump a lot before you play the 6 mana card, but that is insanely efficient if you can fit that many cards in your hand. This one, I'm feeling, is going to be better when you draw it later after playing this spell, but it definitely seems strong. You also have Movement of Desire, which is Lifesteal, deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. So if you guys remember Kronks from Galakron's Awakening, that's going to be basically the same effect as one of his effects. As we saw in the past with Kronks, it's a really good way to keep yourself alive and push some damage, although Kronks was also a 6/6, so that was helping a lot. This is a 3-mana spell, so it's a little bit weaker. Next up here, I don't know if you guys can see that behind my head, I'll move out of the way a little bit for you, but we have Movement of Envy. Remove the top 6 cards from your opponent's deck. So that's going to be basically a Corrupted Ticketus plus 1 card, so that's pretty insane. Now, obviously, you're not getting the 6-mana 8/8, which was a big part of Ticketus, but I do think this effect is strong. I think typically removing cards from your opponent's deck is pretty weak and pretty overvalued, because typically it's not going to matter in a game unless you hit exactly that one card. But with destroying the top 6 cards of your opponent's deck, you are very likely to hit that one card that actually makes the difference and makes this a card worth running. We also have the Movement of Gluttony, which is give a random minion in your hand, deck, and battlefield +6/+6. So that's going to be the most immediately board affecting one besides the next one here, where you get immediate stats that you can use to go face or to make a trade, and you get some stats for later. So it's just a really efficient buff card. It definitely would see play if it was a card on its own, so it's definitely a good effect. It remains to be seen if it's ever worth picking off of the Discover, because I feel like a lot of the time you're going to be playing from behind and you won't have a minion to hit with this, but maybe you do, and maybe it works out. Next up here, we have Movement of Wrath. Deal 6 damage to all characters. So this is basically a Fellfire potion, if you guys remember that card. It's a pretty old one, so I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, and it didn't see much play because of the insane amount of damage it does to your face. This unfortunately has the same problem where it is doing 6 damage to your face, so that is kind of an issue, but it does also afford you a huge board clear, so I think it's probably worth it for 3 mana. Next up, we have Movement of Sloth. 3 mana, summon a 6/6 demon with Taunt and Reborn. So this is just going to be some really good survivability. You have some survivability in this card with both Sloth and Desire, so that's going to be really good for you. You also have the board clear option, so this is definitely looking like it's going to be a good stabilizing tool. Now, there are 7 options, so that makes the Discover a little bit unreliable. You could obviously hit 3 of these options that just do nothing for you right now. And for 6 mana, that's a huge commitment, so you can't really afford to hit the stuff that does nothing. So I feel like in a lot of games, this is just going to be stuck in hand, because you can't afford to play it and whiff. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe you just hit often enough. 3 out of 7 is really good odds to see what you're looking for, so I do think it's, like, pretty solid. Also, another cool thing about the 6/6 with Taunt and Reborn is that it's a demon, which means that you can resummon this with Gul'dan. In Wild, this gives you 2 6/6 demons with Taunt and Reborn after playing this one spell. Because, of course, when the minion dies, it's reborn, and then it dies again, giving you 2 bodies for Gul'dan. Overall, this seems like a really strong control tool, and I definitely think it's going to see play in Warlock, but it could have some issues into things like aggro. Alright, next up here we have a little mini theme of Warlock cards that deal fatigue damage to you. With Crescendo, you're taking a fatigue damage and dealing that much damage to all enemies for 3 mana. It's a Fel spell, so it's not going to synergize with the Shadow stuff for Warlock, but if there is any sort of Fel implications, like that 1-drop that copies your... Was it your highest cost Fel spell or a random one? I can't remember. But it copies a Fel spell in your hand. That could be really good for a card like this to get copies of Crescendo. So the fact that it is Fel is definitely a factor. Also, as for how good it is, I do think that once this reaches 2, it's an actually good card. School Spirit saw a lot of play, and this would be essentially the same, but it is one-sided and hits the enemy's face, so it's even better. You can play this in an aggro deck to clear the opponent's board, just take a little bit of damage for it and you're fine, and you keep your board as well. Another thing that's really enticing about that is the other cards that support this game plan are definitely more focused towards a minion-based deck. So you definitely do want to play this in an aggro deck, and that's really cool that it is one-sided so you can. It's also pushing face damage, which makes it a real natural fit for that kind of deck as well, because you really want your removal spells to also push face damage if they can. Overall, Crescendo has a lot of things going for it that look really good, so I think this is going to see a lot of play. Next up, we have Baritone Imp. A 2-mana 2/2, except not really, because he has Battle Cry, take fatigue damage, gain that much attack and health. So at base, this guy is a 2-mana 3/3 that takes 1 health to play. That's definitely comparable to some cards we've seen success with in the past, but it is a little bit worse than a Flame Imp, so I do think it's going to shine a little bit more once you reach those higher fatigue numbers. It is important to note, though, that this is an Imp, which all of the Imp stuff is still staying in Standard, or at least most of it, so that's looking really good for a card like this. Now, I don't know how many cards the deck is actually losing, because Curses and all of the Imp stuff are from this year, as far as I can remember, but I'm sure there's some cards they need to replace. And this can slot in nicely. It also supports the new game plan of fatiguing yourself to get some benefit with Crescendo, this card, and our next card. So that definitely makes it a nice little package that you might want to fit in. Alright, our next card up here is Crazed Conductor, a 5-mana 4/5, which is pretty good stats for this effect. Insane stats, actually, I would say. And as Battlecry, take fatigue damage, summon that many 3/3 imps. So honestly, at a base level, taking 1 fatigue from this guy, that's a good card. A 4/5 that summons a 3/3 is a good card. That's good stats for the cost, and it's swarming a little bit by having 2 minions. It's a natural fit for the kind of decks that want to play it. Now, obviously, this scales the more fatigue damage you take, so it just gets better from there. Taking 2 damage to summon 2 3/3s is insane. Anything beyond that is just gravy. I think this card is going to be ridiculous, and I think people are going to hate it. One drawback of it is that it does cap out. Once you reach 6 fatigue damage on this, it will do nothing else if you get higher, but it will do more damage to you. Fortunately, we do have a way to combat that coming up next. The Felstring Harp is a 2-mana weapon for Warlock that says, whenever your hero would take damage on your turn, restore 2 health instead, lose 1 durability. So, this is a 3 durability weapon, which means you get 3 procs of that. So theoretically, you could take like 30 fatigue damage 3 times and completely negate all of it, and also heal yourself along the way. Now, obviously, that's not going to help the main issue in that scenario, but you can see how this could be powerful. Now, this can obviously be used to go deeper into fatigue with those fatigue cards so that you can get some more powerful effects, or it can be used to negate the damage from their battle cries when they draw you a fatigue card. Obviously, it can be used for a wide variety of other things, such as the hero power, but those are the main goals with this card, obviously, in this set. Now, I do think that this looks very good for Warlock because they have both this Felstring Harp and the Void Virtuoso, which gives them just a lot of protection from the damage they're doing to themselves. Now, we haven't seen a ton of healing like Warlock likes, like Drain Soul and Touch of Nathrezim. I think Touch might be rotating. I'll have to check on that. Yeah, so Touch of the Nathrezim is rotating, so a lot of the Warlock healing is going to be leaving, so Warlock definitely could use the extra healing from this weapon, but it really makes it hard to play those self-damage cards, so it's good that Warlock got the Void Virtuoso. That's really going to help things. Alright, next up here, starting us off with the cards from the final reveal stream, we have Demonic Dynamics. A 3-mana spell for Warlock that says, discover 2 demons, finale, give them +1/+2. Now, discover 2 demons for 3 mana is actually pretty solid. A lot of people don't realize this, but the demon pool is actually pretty good. There's not that many neutral demons, so when you discover a demon, you're mostly discovering class cards. Now, there are a lot of Warlock demons that aren't great, but there are a lot of really good effects on demons, so I think a card like this is going to be pretty valuable, especially in Standard where the pool is much smaller. You also have this finale, which is a nice upside for the card, so I do think this is a pretty strong card. Now, this card is a little bit at odds with itself because you like to discover at the start of a turn, so you have cards to play. So telling you to discover at the end of a turn is definitely a drawback for the card, but you don't need that finale, it's just a bonus. So sometimes you can just play it to discover 2 demons, so you can have a card to play this turn, and sometimes you can use it to get the buffs for next turn. So overall, I think this is a really strong card. I do think it will see play. I'm not sure how much, but I think it's stronger than it looks because the pool is so consistent. Alright, our next card up here is Dirge of Despair. It's a new 6-mana spell for Warlock. It's a shadow spell, so it does have synergy with things like Tamsin. And it says, deal 3 damage to a character. If that kills it, summon a demon from your deck. Now, it's important to say on that shadow note that Tamsin is rotating, so that will not be a standard thing. But in Wild, you can play 2 copies of this with Tamsin. Now, that is 9 mana, so that seems fairly unlikely to happen naturally, but you can reduce the cost of this with Runed Mithril Rod. So I wouldn't discount that from being a possibility. So something I haven't shared with you guys because I haven't looked over the core set yet in a video is that Warlock's core set contains Voidcaller, Enhanced Dreadlord, and Mal'Ganis. So Big Demon Warlock is actually looking like a deck, and this card supports that very well. Now, obviously, you really don't want to summon a Voidcaller off of this, but if you do have a big demon in hand, it's not the end of the world. But summoning like a Mal'Ganis off of this on turn 6 is going to be backbreaking for so many opponents. It's just a really strong stat dump, and it just shuts them out from being able to go face, so they have to address your board. Overall, I do think Control Warlock looks like a deck, and I think it's going to be a big demon deck, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Next up here we have Rythm and Roots. It's the 4-mana legendary spell for Druid, and it's a nature spell. It says choose one, secretly, summon 3 5/5 Ancients in 2 turns, or 8/8 Giants in 4 turns. Now obviously this is a really slow card, but it is also only 4 mana. A lot of these skip your turn cards come out on turn 5 or later, so this is really a lot more playable than a lot of people seem to be thinking. Turn 4 you can very easily skip for an effect like this. And then on 5 and 6, you can still play things, so it's not like them not being out yet is a huge deal for you. You're not, like, limited in what you can do while you're waiting for that. So, I do think this is going to be very strong. I also think another aspect of this not enough people are talking about is the fact that you can get extra copies of this. So you can actually create copies of this with Moonlit Guidance, which is going to be insane. Imagine your opponent getting a board of 8/8s for 3 turns in a row because they played 3 of these spells. That's disgusting, and it's going to blow people out of the water. You just can't remove a board that big and that wide at the same time 3 turns in a row. That's just a lot of an ask. Now, outside of the scenarios where you're stacking these and playing a ton of minions, I do think it's hard for this to be that good. You really need to overwhelm your opponent with this, otherwise it's just a little bit of a stat dump and your opponent just ignores it, clears it, and goes on with their day. It's really not a lot to ask in modern Hearthstone for your opponent to clear 1 board, unless you're against hard aggro and they just won't have any way to deal with this. In which case, it is a little bit good to give you some tools to trade on board, but you're going to want to go with the 5/5s like every time, because the 8/8s are going to be way too slow. I really think that this spell would benefit from giving you taunt on the 5/5s, so there's a bit more of an incentive to pick the 5/5s other than that you only wait 2 turns. Because I do think it's a significantly weaker option right now, even though you're waiting the 2 extra turns for the 8/8s. It's just the 2 turns, you can still do stuff during those 2 turns, so it's not as huge of a drawback as losing 3/3 in stats is. If I'm going to be waiting 2 or more turns for my stat dump, then I definitely want it to be as big as possible. So this card has a few struggles for it, but overall I do think it's going to see play. I don't think it's going to be the kind of card you shove in every deck, but it will see play in some kind of Druid deck, I'm sure. Alright, next up we have Harmonic Mood, a new spell for Druid that says, give your hero +2 attack this turn, gain 4 armor, swaps each turn. So the other half of that is gain 4 attack and 2 armor, obviously. This is a really powerful tool for 2 mana. 2 attack, 4 armor is obviously a little bit underwhelming. The armor gain is not nearly as valuable as the attack, but +4 attack, 2 armor, that is very efficient for 2 mana. And I do think you'll play it for the 2 attack sometimes. You just will need the 2 attack, or it'll be the reach you need for lethal, or you just have to remove something. But you will want to wait for it to be on 4 attack a large portion of the time, because that's just so much stronger, I feel. Now, there's actually a deck in Druid that is trying to gain attack in Standard for the 7-drop, but this unfortunately costs 2 mana, which means you're not going to be able to hero power with it unless you use a Tour Guide. I believe Tour Guide is in the core set, so you do actually have that option, which means we may be able to see some pretty huge minions off of that guy because of Tour Guide. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for. Tour Guide is probably going to slot into that deck regardless for Druid. Because of the fact that he's giving you 5 attack and 5 armor, he's just so strong in that deck. Obviously, that's only once you've reached the peak of your hero power, but that's also only vanilla playing out those minions that buff your hero power, not copying them at all. So overall, I think this card is a valuable piece to a good deck, so it will definitely see play. Alright, next up we have Death Metal Knight, a 3-mana 3/4 for Death Knight that has 2 blood runes, and it says Taunt. This costs health instead of mana if your hero was healed this turn. It's also an undead. So this is like a Sorfang, like how Sorfang works once he's died at least once, except that it's activated by you healing. Now healing is a thing Blood Death Knight does a lot. It's important to know that gaining health and healing are not the same thing, so when you play Vampiric Blood, that is not going to be activating this guy. But whenever you heal with lifesteal cards and stuff such as that, you will definitely be able to play this guy. Now there is one card that actually will never be able to proc this guy, and that is Blood Boil. Blood Boil goes off at the end of your turn, so it will never be during the same turn that you were healed. Outside of that one specific card, I do think this is very easy to activate. So, depending on if Blood Death Knight wants a 3/4 with Taunt for 3 health, this could see some significant play. To me, that seems like a card that might not be worth a slot, so we'll have to see. Next up here, we have a 1 Frost Rune card for Death Knight, another 3-drop, this time a 2/1, it is also an undead, and it says Battlecry, deal 2 damage, finale to all enemies. So this is just a really powerful board clear for Frost, and that is something that they struggle a little bit with. They do have Remorseless Winter, but that is currently the only really great wide board clear. They have that swipe card as well, Howling Blast, but the 1 damage AoE is just often not enough to clear up boards. This extra 2 damage AoE is definitely going to help the class, and I do think it's going to be a stronger deck. That said, the deck is obviously already good, so it doesn't necessarily need the help, but this is definitely a good piece for that. And it does also go face, just like Remorseless Winter, so you don't have to worry about losing out on that aspect. You get a nice 2/1 body with it. It's undead, so it activates your undead synergy stuff. It leaves a corpse. There's just so much good stuff going for this card. And it isn't an ice spell. And it isn't a frost spell, which means unlike Remorseless Winter, this isn't going to clog up your pool for that Overseer Frigidara to draw you your specific cards. Overall, this just looks like it does a lot of the things that good Hearthstone cards do, so I definitely think that this one is a solid card. It is also important to note that this is a 1 Frost Rune card, which means this can be played in Rainbow and also combined with 2 runes of any other type or another Frost Rune and another rune of any type. So this is a very flexible card. Alright, next up here we have Taste of Chaos for Demon Hunter. It's a 1-mana Fel spell that says deal 2 damage to a minion, finale, discover a Fel spell. So this is a nice little chip removal spell. Unfortunately, Demon Hunters don't really like these that much. They had something called Throw Glaive that did the same amount of damage for the same cost, but it would also come back to your hand if you killed a minion with it. This card is able to find you some significantly better cards, so I wouldn't count it out, but it is an effect that Demon Hunter has scoffed at in the past. Demon Hunter just really likes to push damage face, so anything that is just directly doing damage to minions and not, like, adjacently destroying minions while dealing damage face isn't really in Demon Hunter's wheelhouse. However, the ability to discover a Fel spell is very strong, and Demon Hunter does not get that much card generation, so this card is looking pretty powerful for them. It's also a very limited pool because it is only Fel spells from Demon Hunter, so you should be able to find some things pretty reliably with this, so I wouldn't count it out. Now, unfortunately, Jace is rotating, so that is not an angle for this card, but in Wild, this will definitely be an auto-include in Jace decks. Alright, next up here we have Guitar Soloist, a new 5-mana minion for Demon Hunter. It's a 4/3 that says Battle Cry if you control no other minions, draw a spell, a minion, and a weapon. This is a very strong draw card, and it is Tutor, but I don't know how much Demon Hunter wants this. There might be a Demon Hunter deck that does want this, but Sightless Magistrate is still a card in Standard, as is the Glaive, which means that you have the ability to draw so many cards in an aggro deck you would never even consider this, especially because it needs an empty board. That said, there may be another sort of Demon Hunter deck that comes out that does actually want this, so it could end up being good. I do think it would require some kind of slower Demon Hunter deck because you very often have a lot of tokens lying around on board in Demon Hunter. They tend to generate a lot of 1/1s and they just stick around because there's so much stuff for your opponent to deal with. So this is a pretty hard effect to get off in this class in particular. I don't know how good it's going to be because of that, but there is always the chance that some deck wants this, so we'll have to see. Next up here we have Saxophone Soloist, the Soloist for Shaman. It's a 1-mana 1/2 Murloc that says Battle Cry if you control no other minions, add a Saxophone Soloist to your hand. So this is an infinite 1-drop as long as it's the first card you play to reload your board, so that's really powerful. Now, one thing about that is that because this requires an empty board, 2 copies of this in hand will not help. One of them will end up just being played out as a 1/2. But in a Murloc deck, I don't think you're drawing both of them often enough to care about that. Just having that one consistent reload minion is a really strong tool in that deck, so I do think that this is really powerful. Now, that said, I don't know how good Shamans are in Standard right now. I believe that the 3-mana spell is rotating, so they do not have that anymore. So it's going to be a little bit of a weak deck. I do think in Wild that this will see some play, potentially, but there are a lot of good Murlocs in Wild, so I'm not entirely sure. There's also the fact that you really want to play something like Tidecaller before playing your minions, so that really hurts a card like this because you have to play it first. So there are definitely some drawbacks to it. Outside of Murlocs, though, there are definitely decks that would consider this. For example, in Wild, if you want to play a Control Shaman, you can play Hagatha. And what Hagatha does is every time you play a minion, you get a spell. So if you have an infinite minion that you can replay anytime it gets removed, you have infinite spells. That's going to be a really powerful tool for Hagatha decks and really empower her as a card. Now, that said, Hagatha hasn't really been at the top of the meta for a long time, not since she was in Standard, really, but there is always a chance that she does something in the meta. Outside of that, there is also a new spell that we will get into next that this synergizes very well with. And here we have that spell I was talking about, Melomania. It's a 0-mana Shaman spell that says each time you play a minion this turn, add a random Shaman spell to your hand. Now, this is adding a random spell. That is important to note, because random spells can be any spell, including the spell that is generating them. So, Melomania can give you another Melomania. It's not very possible to go infinite with this card, but the fact that it is possible definitely makes it intriguing. It's also the effect we were just discussing on Hagatha. Hagatha does the same thing. This gives you that effect for a turn, so that's pretty cool. I do think the effect is very strong, as we saw with Hagatha. It just really helps your staying power in games, so I do think that this is really good. Now, having it as a spell does mean that you're going to have to look for your optimal moment to play a bunch of minions and get a handful of spells. But I do think that can be a really powerful strategy for Shaman, so I don't think that really holds the card back much. This also interestingly pushes an idea for some sort of Control Shaman, if Control Shaman becomes a deck, to play a bunch of 1-drops so they can get a bunch of spells out of them. Which is a really interesting idea. I always like being able to afford 1-drops in control decks because it's really nice to have that early game consistency against aggro decks so that you don't get run over so often. Speaking of not getting run over so often, we have some healing for Shaman. 3 mana heal 8, so it's the same as Healing Touch for Druid. But this one has a bonus of Finale, summon a 3/3 elemental with Taunt. So when you get the Finale for this is actually a really strong card. When you don't, it's a really mediocre card. 3 mana heal 8 is pretty below the curve. 1 mana heal 5 is about on curve for something that's playable, at least if you're healing the hero. Now this can target minions, so there is that angle to talk about. You can heal your minions up instead of just your face, and that is powerful. So that's always an angle for this. But 8 healing for 3 mana is pretty underwhelming, so you're gonna want to be getting that elemental like every time. That said, when you get the elemental, this card is insane, especially if you're healing up a minion on board. Being able to take a trade, then heal your minion right back up and get a 3/3, that's bonkers. So it looks like some sort of tempo where mid-range Shaman could definitely be a deck. Next up here we have Synthesize for Mage. It's a 1 mana spell that says add a random 1, 2, and 3 cost elemental to your hand. Now, this is a really strong card for Mage. I don't know how strong it is in Standard, but it's always just good tempo to get curve minions like this, so there's a chance it sees play just for that. And there is that aggro mage deck running around, so seems like kind of a natural fit for that, so we'll have to see with that. But in Wild, you have access to a side quest that says play elementals 2 turns in a row, then draw 3 spells. Being able to have one card that is actually 3 elementals is going to help the elemental mage deck a lot. Now, Elemental Mage has never been, like, a top-tier deck. It's never been at the head of the meta. But it has been a potential design for a deck for a while. So things like this always make it worth taking another look at to see if it's maybe viable now. Outside of that, like I said, in Standard, I do think this is a decent tempo card. We will have to look at the pool of elementals to see just how good they are on average, but I do think that it's going to be very good, especially since this is completely random elementals, so they can be from any class. There's some really good elementals out there, and I don't think there's that many bad ones these days. Next up here, we have Holotechnician. That's right, Holomancer is back, but this time it looks like he actually brought something useful with him. Because this 3 mana 3/4 says after any minion takes exactly 1 damage, destroy it. This is going to be an incredible combo with cards like Arcane Missiles to just destroy your opponent's board for really cheap. This plus Cinderstorm is also really insane. Now, obviously, some combos with this are a little bit, like, ridiculous, and you would never need to do them, like Mask of Cthulhu. That's a 10 mana combo, and it's like, okay, I need to clear all 7 minions on the opponent's board. Like, that's the only scenario you would do that in. So, I don't think that that's really typically worth it, but the Cinderstorm and Arcane Missiles clears will be disgusting. This also interestingly makes Arcane Explosion a viable card with this card, because 1 Arcane Explosion knocks out an entire board with this guy up. Overall, this guy looks like a really strong tool for Control Mages and for Reno Mage. Reno Mage especially, to be honest, that's the main Control Mage that exists in Wild, because otherwise Mage is mostly playing Secrets, and I know Secrets are not messing with this. Our next card up here is Cosmic Keyboard, and I just have to say, this has some absolutely beautiful artwork. This whole set has amazing art, but I really love the Cosmic stuff like Harbinger Celestia. I really wanted her to be good when she came out because of how awesome her art was, so it really disappointed me that she was unplayable. Now, obviously, I knew she was going to be unplayable from her effect and everything, but you know, I really wanted that art to be seen. This looks like a much more playable card, so that's really good. And it seems strong on top of that. It is a 2-mana 0/3 weapon. It is a 2-mana 0/3 weapon that says after you cast a spell, summon an elemental with stats equal to its cost, lose 1 durability. So this card is actually insane power creep. I don't know how many of you noticed this, but Medivh used to be a card in One Night in Karazhan. He was an 8-mana 7/7. 8 mana to play this guy. To give you Atiesh, which was literally this same exact effect, except it was a random minion of the same cost instead of having stats equal. A random minion on average for the really big spells is going to be much worse, I feel like, unless you're playing exactly an 8 or 10 mana spell. So Atiesh was actually worse than this too. Not only is this a cheaper Atiesh, it seems to be better on average. It's also important to note that because you can play this really early, you can use this as a more tempo card. And you can play this, then play a 3-mana spell, a 4-mana spell, and then a 3-mana spell and a 2-drop, or a 5-mana spell, like whatever you want. That's still really good value for 2 mana. That's insane, getting an extra 3/3, 4/4, 5/5 with your spells. That's just really good, because you're still getting the spell effects, so you're just getting free tempo out of the fact that you have this weapon up. I definitely think this is going to be played, and I don't think it's limited at all in the type of deck that plays it. I think there's going to be tempo decks, aggro decks, and control decks, big spell, that are going to play this, because it looks insane. Next up here, we have Harmonic Disco, new card for Paladin. It's a 5-mana holy spell that says, discover a 5-cost minion, summon it with +1/+1. Swaps each turn. So it swaps to discover 1 cost and summon it with +5/+5. So this is a really interesting card. It looks pretty much the same to you at first glance, but when you really think about it, it's not at all. A 1-drop with +5/+5 is on average going to give you like a 6/8, 6/7. That's like average. Most of the time that's the result, and there's no further effect than that. Now a 5-cost minion, summoning that with +1/+1, well, that could be a lot of things. There are so many 5-cost minions with a variety of effects. It's insane the wide range that that half has. You could get a Ziliax and get some healing and rush. Or you could get a... I forget his name, the 5-mana 1/1 that summons a 5/8 with taunt. He's rotating, but in Wild I think this is bad because the pool is too big, but outside of that, you can get that guy, summon a 5/8 with taunt out of your 2/2. That's really good. Like, I just think that this is a really solid card because there are so many good 5-drops that you can get. Now, it is a bit of a gamble because there are also bad 5-drops, but you should be able to have a good option out of 3 every time. If you don't, you are pretty unlucky. I think this looks like a solid card, so the only thing holding it back would be the fact that it costs 5 mana. Cariel is rotating, so there is not going to be that holy spell reduction anymore that's really easily accessible. So I do think it struggles a little bit because of that, and like I said, in Wild it's too slow, so you're not playing Cariel to get this down by a mana. That just... Plus, it doesn't even really help with curve. It just helps you get more stuff fit into a turn. Because Cariel's 4 mana, so this naturally curves after her anyway. Overall, I think the spell looks interesting and cool, but the fact that it is 5 mana does hold it back a little bit, in my opinion. Our next spell here is another holy spell, this time for Priest. It's 6 mana, Harmonic Pop. Deal 3 damage to all minions, and summon a 6/6 Pop Star. Swaps each turn. On the flip half, it deals 6 damage to all minions, and summons a 3/3. So this seems like a really powerful board clear for Priest. Dealing 6 AoE and summoning a 3/3 is a really solid effect. And when you only need the 3 AoE, a 6/6 is really strong. For 6 mana, both of those effects seem really powerful. Priest always loves board clears, and they like to get free minions with their board clears, so I do think this is a natural fit for Control Priest. Now, Control Priest is losing the quest line, so they're losing a little bit of that strength they have, but I do think it will still be a deck. It usually is. And I do think this will be a very strong tool for them. Especially because of the 3 damage AoE half. That 6/6 is a lot. 6/6s are huge in Hearthstone. You can really tell this when you play something like a Rat Trap and get that 6/6 out. They're like... 6/6s are not a joke. Most removal will not deal with them by itself. So a 6/6 is like a major threat. Plus this 3 damage AoE can clear most aggro boards, so it's going to be adequate for most decks you come across. Overall, this looks insane to me, and I can't see this not seeing play. Next up here, we have Mixtape, a new 1-mana spell for Rogue, and we know how much Rogue likes their 1-mana spells, so this already looks somewhat promising. What this card's going to do is discover a copy of a card your opponent played this game. So this is a new Thief Rogue card, obviously. The main idea is to discover a class card off of it. But it's also really interestingly going to get you some really valuable cards a lot of the time. Hearthstone is a competitive game, which means that most of the time your opponent is playing good cards. That means discovering from a pool of exclusively cards your opponent played is typically discovering from a pool of really good cards that you want to play. So you can go ahead and get like an extra copy of Astalor off of this. You can get yourself a... Well, Guff is rotating, but that's one of the things you could have gotten. Especially because Druids tend to play that as, like, say, the 3rd card they play, so it's not that hard to get it off of this. But, of course, it's rotating, so that is a wild-only thing. However, this card is a Thief card that is actually still really good in Wild, because you're not diluting that pool by having more cards in Wild. You are, kind of, because there's more cards your opponent could be playing, but your opponent is going to be playing the best of the best cards out of the format most of the time, so you are discovering some really solid cards from this. Overall, I think for 1 mana, this is really good value. I think it's going to see a lot of play, and I think it has a chance to see play outside of Thief Rogue just for that extra value and extra good cards. Next up here is Thornmantle Musician. It's a 1-mana 1/3 Quillbore for Hunter that says, Finale, the next beast you summon gets +1/+1. So this is just a nice little bonus for a beast hunter. It's not huge, but it's essentially a 1-mana 2/4 if you do get that effect off. That's pretty good. Now, it's the next beast you summon, so that's from any sort of effect. So, say in Wild with Desert Spear, you could summon a 1/1 Rush, it gets +1/+1 becomes a 2/2 Rush. Whatever you summon, whatever it is, the 1-mana spell that summons the Bloodhound with Rush, that's going to also get +1/+1 with Rush. Or, I mean, not the Rush. The Rush isn't part of this card, but you get what I mean. This is just a little efficient buff card, and it's just a 1-mana 1/3 when it's not doing that. Now, the question is Quillbore a tribe that Hunter cares about? Because this card, just being a 1/3 is not particularly impressive, so I feel like you want it to do something when it's not finaleing, and I don't think it really does right now. Being a 1/3 Quillbore is not really a benefit to Hunter. Being just a 1/3 body is not a good enough reason to run something in Hearthstone anymore, so I do struggle to see where this finds a home. It's a little bit too small of an effect, and it's just not that valuable without the finale. We'll have to see, but to me this looks more like a pack filler. It's very unfortunate for this card because I really want it to be good. The art is incredible. I love the baby hyena. Last, and maybe also least, we have a warrior card. So a 4-mana 3/2 weapon for warrior called Kodohide Drum Kit. As Death Rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions, gain armor while equipped to improve. So this is a decent board clear for Warrior. You get to attack with a 3-2 weapon, gain as much armor as you can, then attack again, you clear a board. That's pretty strong. Now, there are some really bad lines for this, like the fact that your opponent sees this coming, so they can just refuse to play into the board clear, where something like a Brawl, they have to guess you have it to hold things back. They just are telegraphed that they need to hold resources because of this card, which makes it a pretty weak board clear compared to a lot of stuff in Warrior. On top of that, you have the fact that this is a weapon, which means it can get disrupted with things like Rustdrop Viper, which is in the core set. So a lot of decks will be playing Rustdrop Viper. A tradable weapon destruction is really powerful, especially with all these new weapons being added in this new set. Now that said, the Rustdrop Viper will activate the effect, so it's not like you lose the Death Rattle. You still get the Death Rattle, you just don't get it when you wanted it, and it's probably not big enough. Now in Wild, this has a chance to go off insanely because of Armorsmith, but you don't need to deal 100 damage to the enemy board. Now, maybe you could use that for some sort of Silas OTK instead of Shield Slam. It does seem more viable than keeping all of that armor up for Shield Slam. To just play Armorsmith, ramp this up, and then you just Silas over the 1/4, hit it with the weapon, and then you deal all of that damage face. Like, that seems like it could be a viable game plan. It's just so slow is the problem. So, like, yeah, sure, it's a viable combo deck, but it's like tier 4. So overall, this card looks good, but it does not look at all like something Warrior needed to pull it out of the gutter. So it looks like Control Warrior is just going to be nothing, pretty much. It might be a deck because they have some good control tools, but at the end of the day, it doesn't look like they got anything that valuable or really powerful to end the game. So if there's decks that are reliably ending the game early enough for Control Warrior to just not be viable, then I don't think it has any chance. Alright, that's going to do it for the detailed reviews. Now on to star ratings. Symphony of Sins is a 5-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Crescendo is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Baritone Imp is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Crazed Conductor is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Felstring Harp is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Demonic Dynamics is a 4-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Dirge of Despair is a 5-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Rythm and Roots is a 3-star card in Standard and a 1-star card in Wild. Harmonic Mood is a 4-star card in both Standard and Wild. Death Metal Knight is a 3-star card in both Standard and Wild. In Wild, there's a chance it sees place in Odd Death Knight, so I am giving it 3 stars. Hardcore Cultist is a 5-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Taste of Chaos is a 3-star card in Standard and a 4-star card in Wild. Guitar Soloist is a 2-star card in Standard and a 1-star card in Wild. Saxophone Soloist is a 4-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Melomania is a 5-star card in Standard and a 3-star card in Wild. Chill Vibes is a 4-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Synthesize is a 4-star card in both Standard and Wild. Holotechnician is a 4-star card in both Standard and Wild. Cosmic Keyboard is a 5-star card in both Standard and Wild. Harmonic Disco is a 5-star card in Standard and a 1-star card in Wild. Harmonic Pop is a 4-star card in both Standard and Wild. Mixtape is a 4-star card in both Standard and Wild. Thornmantle Musician is a 2-star card in Standard and a 1-star card in Wild. And Kodohide Drum Kit is a 3-star card in Standard and a 2-star card in Wild. Well, there you go, guys. That wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, remember to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all my new content, which I release every week. What do you guys think about these? Is getting this expansion a must, or are these cards a bust? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Alright guys, remember to subscribe to my channel because every single one of you guys gets your own personal FBI agent. That is right, you will have an agent specifically dedicated to you, watching what you do on the internet and texting you good night, sleep well every night. So if you want to have your own FBI best friend, subscribe to my channel. Anyway, that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys for watching. Stay safe. Peace.